Welcome to the Healthy Human Revolution podcast. I'm Dr. Lori Marvis, and I'm so honored to welcome Matthew Wichrowski. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you
Well,
for inviting me.
well, thank you for taking some time. I know we've had a few hiccups with scheduling, and I appreciate your patience. And so you are a horticultural therapist, and that is a tongue twister for me for some reason. And I discovered you by reading Summer Rain Oak's book, and I was so intrigued by just the whole process because I love nature myself. I love hiking and running and camping, and I just had to reach out to you. So could you please explain to us what that is and how you became interested in it?
Well, a horticultural therapist is somebody who uses nature and nature-based activities for therapeutic purposes. So generally speaking, in the field, there's therapeutic horticulture, which is something that, a home owner or person may do on their own. But then when it gets elevated to horticultural therapy, then you're applying the clinical framework, to an individual and looking at significant issues to work with. It could be a number of things, whether it's physical, social, cognitive, or emotional. And basically activity therapy and the therapeutic use of self, therapeutic aspects of the environment in terms of making it more survival oriented, more biophilically oriented. And then again, the activity, which is the exercise, and it could be an exercise of body, mind, or emotion, or spirit for that matter.
So how did you become interested in horticultural therapy? Because that's always interesting to see how people end up in the specialty that they practice.
Well, I grew up spending a lot of time in nature in the woods around Long Island where I live, and was going into psychology as a vocation. And after college, before grad school, working with autistic adults and seeing how some of the guys I knew from the group homes reacted in the natural setting, in a greenhouse setting, and seemed to be very soothing and calming. And I know that I enjoyed it, and I find a lot of pleasure and stress reduction out in nature, but I couldn't expect everybody to feel the same. But it seems like there's some universal component to that. And with the right configuration of nature, so to speak, we achieve a calming and relaxing result from that. And so then I found out there was a whole community of people doing horticultural therapy, American Horticultural Therapy Association. So I joined, and I've, been a member for 30 years now.
Oh, wow. So tell me what you mean by structuring like, what do you mean by structuring the environment or the therapy? Like, how do you even begin to, you look at someone and say, okay, this is what I'm going to prescribe for them in the therapy realm. Can you explain a little bit how your mind processes a first interaction with someone?
Well, I mean, it's like any kind of clinical process or clinical meeting where you build some rapport, of course, and get to know why a person has come to see you. And then from the clinical standpoint, you do your assessment, and you find out what relative strengths and weaknesses there are, and what areas that may be beneficial to be worked upon. Certainly driven by the client, but also by clinical experience. And then goals are determined from that, and then activities determined to meet those goals. Sometimes one has to adapt the activities in order to, in rehabilitation where I work, physical medicine and rehabilitation, sometimes you adapt the activities by making them a little more challenging, and sometimes you make them a little more easy, and you may offer some help. So that person is enabled and they accomplish the task and they can meet their goals without being frustrated. I always try to make a person reach, but not be frustrated. And certainly in physical rehabilitation, that's an important component that results in better outcomes in the long run. And so then we look at the outcomes and we see, is this person making progress in these areas? Do we have to change anything? Do we just continue to go on because things are going well until whatever goals are met?
So what do you mean by, so we're set in a setting, so they're in a hospital setting. How do you are you bringing plants? Are they planting? Is it just being surrounded by greenery? So what is that what are the actual doing, what is the patient actually doing in relation to the horticultural therapy?
Some years back, we had a wonderful greenhouse called the Glass Garden, which Hurricane Sandy, put an end to. But that was the setting in which we held our therapy. It was a small botanical garden, a greenhouse with all kinds of tropical plants, sensory-oriented plants, basically like a small botanical garden you'd find anywhere, except that here is attached to a hospital. And we would have patients come down from the floors to the greenhouse setting and do gardening activities. Now, after the storm, we don't have the greenhouse anymore, but I go to patient rooms and to patient units. For instance, this morning, I go to a locked psychiatry acute care unit and to an art room, and we have, a group usually ranges from 5 or 6 to 9 or 10. And we discuss a range of house plants, and then they pick something they like, and we show them how to pot it up. And then they get to keep that as a beginning or continuation of a hobby. And I like to think that it's somewhat of a positive psychological approach. So I don't necessarily talk about the patient's issues. Many have depression. Many are students from NYU who have threatened suicide and are just overloaded with life and think that might be a possible way out. And so many of my patients are younger and students. And so we provide choice, we provide some positive psychology there, dealing with their issues throughout the day, and yet they can come to the horticulture group and relax and talk, kind of open up a little bit. We don't delve into, really hard issues, and it's fun, so it improves the mood. The research shows that certain green surroundings help improve mood and also clear the mind a little bit, cognitive restoration, as it's called. And it's social as well. So you have a lot of nice banter and conversation and learning about plants, enabling people to be successful in their hobby pursuits. So that's one program that I run. And then the afternoon is rehabilitation on a medically complex floor. So I'll work with people with cardiac issues or neuromuscular disorders. And also, basically, there's other medical comorbidities with that they may have diabetes, they may have had an amputation, they may have had cancer and have gotten weakened from the treatments. So that floor is rehabilitation, strengthening up, learning how to walk with a physical therapist, getting dressed with the OTs. And then I reinforce a lot of that activity by giving practice. And then we have our separate sort of hobby issues with the horticultural activity. And, people enjoy it. They do.
So when you go to a patient's room, what activities specifically do? Are they also potting and learning,
Yes.
or is it more learning? So it's the hand, it's the dexterity.
Oh, yes. Fine motor skills, range of motion, strength, endurance are some of the physical qualities that we build on, especially in rehab when people have lost a lot of those abilities. So I bring a cart. Into the patient's room. We work on their tabletop. And it's a similar program where I introduce a number of plants and, some interesting stories about them, like coffee, for instance, has a very interesting history. And many of the other plants have, long sociocultural histories with us as we've eaten them over the course of 10,000 or so years, as farmers. And so we talk about these things, and then again, they pick and they pot up their plants. And, I worked with somebody, today who has some cognitive issues. And so sequencing and memory were the main goals of the session, where at the end of the session, we would ask, do you recall a few of the steps that you have? Did you remember a couple of points about the plant? So, it's memory, it's cognitive work, but using the plants as a subject material, so to speak, and meshing with the goals of the rehab unit. And that seems to be, successful.
That's really cool, because if you think about it, it's also kind of distracting them, yet they're also working on goals and probably don't even realize what they're doing, that they're helping themselves. So that is really neat.
That's an excellent point. And many people comment about the pain. They were in pain before, and now they've been working on the plant for the past 20 minutes, and they say, oh, I didn't even think about it. So it's that distraction. It's a positive distraction that can dilute the experience of pain to a certain degree. So yes, many of my patients benefit from the pain reduction and distraction.
That is really cool. I have so many ideas. So after I interviewed Summer Rain, she had included multiple stories, little tidbits, patients, or not patients, but
Uh-huh.
fans had been writing into her and saying how their depression and their anxiety significantly improved. And this was a recurring theme. And I was like, that is utterly amazing. It's like, why hasn't that been introduced to like primary care doctors? Because we see depression and anxiety, and we have, we see the onslaught of everything, all
Yeah.
the chronic diseases. And I was just so enthralled with the book, how to make a plant. Like, I was like, and that's when I was reading, like, oh my goodness, there's like a real therapy to this as well. So when a doctor, is it mostly like PMR docs or, physiatrists that are ordering this for you? Or do you have others that are in, like, let's say someone's in an acute floor, recovering from pneumonia or something. Does other doctors also
Yes.
request your therapy?
Sometimes I'm called on in that exact way, that another therapist in another area has noticed that, a patient is an avid gardener, or they comment about that they love nature. And so, people know me in the hospital, and they'll sometimes, give me a ring, email, and say, hey, look, got this patient, maybe you can come see him. The other day, I started a conversation with a nurse on the maternity ward. And so they have
Oh,
pre and postpartum folks who are anxious, and they're worried, for whatever reasons. So she was saying, well, maybe we can do a pilot where you come up and we do some planting as a nice distraction, as an anxiety reducer, and ease people's transition through this experience. And so that'll be something that's coming up soon. I hope,
that's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, so they could take home a baby and a plant.
Yeah, baby plant and a baby human,
Yep. Let's see what they name them. That'd be
and they
fun.
both, and they raise them up together, and it's a nice thing. One
Exactly.
wonderful thing is that sometimes I see patients over the course of time on an epilepsy unit, and unfortunately also in the psychiatry unit. Sometimes people will return, but they say they have their plants from years ago, and
Oh,
they give me the reports on how big they've gotten, and I love that about that, and
yeah.
it's great to see that they've been successful. It takes a little bit of attention and nurturing to bring a plant along. So if you could tend to a plant, you could probably tend to yourself reasonably well, or at least
Right.
generalize that to a certain degree, that I have needs too that need to be met, and I need to look after them. So for some folks, that becomes part of the therapeutic component in that.
And that's, that was kind of the things that really stood out on those letters from some Marines folks that wrote into her fans, was that, she was like, a recurring theme would be they felt like they couldn't get out of bed because they were so depressed or whatever, but then they saw their plants and like, oh, my plants need me. And it pulled them into activity and out of the depression, which was, I find, so fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, and I really like the idea of your students. My daughter's a third year medical student, and medical students are renowned stress basket cases.
Yeah.
And so I talked to her about this and was speaking to her about you and in Summarine's book and stuff. And so she started plants. I've bought plants as well since then, since we've moved in. I've just adored them. And so as far as, let's say there are students who are stressed and they can't necessarily come to your group or anything in New York, what can they do at home, with your wisdom? How should they start?
Well, if you want to have a little, what I would suggest is a small grouping of plants that's sort of away from the workspace, like in a way, almost like an altar to a certain extent, but it can be just a decorated windowsill where you could go and tend to your plants on occasion. The studies show that, 15 minutes of, say, focusing on the plants, you get a sense of what's called being away, which is one of the components of cognitive restoration. So by taking mini breaks when the stress starts to build up, when you're starting to read the same page over again on your textbooks or your articles, and it's time to take a break. Well, a break in nature, either outside, you can do this as well. Take a short walk around the house and maybe into your garden that you've made that's a little extra special. General nature is good, but if you enhance general nature with plants that have special meaning and have special sensory components, you maximize the effect so that you get drawn into the plant thinking, I got that plant from grandma. I remember when we went out and got that plant. What a great day we had. And now I'm looking at the plant, remembering that. And it takes me away from my current, issues and current stressors and gives the mind a little bit of time to settle and relax. And then you go back to your work a little refreshed. So in that sense, the cognitive restoration is a good component to add, especially in a highly stressful environment where you need periodic restoration to kind of keep your mind operating at the best level. And then there's the psychoevolutionary consideration, which is more the mood. So that's going to lower anxiety and improve your mood. And that's being amongst nature settings that are biophilic, meaning that they have elements that support our survival. Food, flowers, flowers are the main thing. And we smile when we receive flowers, not because of the sentiment, but more so because it's a promise of food from thousands and thousands of generations. When we see flowers, we know what comes next. And we know that, yeah. So when you give somebody flowers, you're offering them care and nourishment and food, as well as that sentiment. So by having these biophilic elements in your garden, flowers, food, sensory plants that you can scratch and sniff, or flowers to smell, or beautiful leaves that you can get lost in the patterns. These things remind us of safety, and can also help improve mood and lower anxiety. So, there's a two-pronged approach to that, the psychoevolutionary, emotional, and the cognitive restoration, which is more of a mental cognitive benefit.
I see so many applications. So I was in the military, and I think, working with vets like at the VA would be an incredible benefit as well, looking at that stress, traumatic brain injury. Have you done work with vets?
Vets are where horticultural therapy got its clinical start. After World War I and then after World War II, with the vets coming back, that's when people started applying horticulture in terms of in a clinical sense. Dr. Rusk, who the Rusk Institute of Rehabilitation is named after, he was a big proponent of the greenhouse, and he wanted a greenhouse in his hospital, but he worked with veterans. It was a shame. He would see people who have lost an arm or a leg and they aren't doing anything with their lives. They're in the vet center, depressed and wasting away. And he's like, no, this person can do things. They can live a good life. Even though they have significant challenges, you can still enjoy the company of others. You can enjoy beauty. You can do things in life, whatever your abilities allow, but you can still accomplish things. And so that was his impetus to sort of develop rehabilitation. And, veterans really kind of sparked a lot of the field as it exists today. And I'm possibly going to Iraq next year to work with trauma victims and refugees.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of like the PTSD and stress reduction will be very important in that setting. So I'm looking forward to that potential next year. We're setting it up right now.
Well, if you go, please, I would love to interview you when you get back. I think that's incredible. I was stationed and I got deployed to the Middle East, so I kind of understand. And as far as, I'm thinking maybe an ER waiting room, calming people there. I mean, there's so many potential spaces to use this. Is there any chance that you might get your greenhouse back?
No chance with that. There's a new hospital in its place.
Oh,
and new state-of-the-art hospital that they've used the grounds for that as well as other. They took down the old Rusk building and the
Oh,
greenhouse.
wow.
So
Oh,
this
wow.
brand new single room, beautiful floor to ceiling windows with views of New York City. It's a gorgeous, hospital. But
Wow.
they have a garden terrace, but it's not a horticultural therapy garden. So it's
I see.
a visiting garden. So a therapy garden is a little different in terms that you have elements that help you achieve your therapeutic means in there. So you
Mm,
might have it set up in certain ways that have more impact than just a visually pleasing garden.
I see. And have you ever heard of the Rodell Institute?
Rodale?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I've read organic gardening since when I first started. I'm an organic gardener forever. I believe in that, and I have read a lot of the books from there, and subscribed to organic gardening for many years.
Yeah, so I interviewed Jeff Ketch, who's their Chief Impact Officer, who works, I met him in September, and I interviewed him just a few weeks ago, or last week actually, and it was really cool because they have also a vet program in bringing in people and helping them become organic farmers and things like that. And they're also doing, they're launching the Regenerative Health Institute,
Uh-huh.
which is incorporating soil health and doctors and learning the importance of just the soil health and growing our food. But what a cool thing would be to add that element of horticultural therapy as well, because they're also working with the hospital near them in Pennsylvania, where they
Really?
actually, yeah, they have a organic farming, like a whole organic farm attached to the in the hospital grounds, and they all
Wow.
that food goes to the patients. What a
Nice.
great way you could move patients out to, the part of them actual planting and I don't know if they have that element, but I know some of their residents are training in the gardens and the farm. I mean, what a great opportunity to do that too. Maybe I could connect you two. I think you might have a lot to talk about,
Yeah.
actually. Let me do that. He's a really nice man. Um, okay, cool.
You mentioned emergency rooms before.
Yeah,
Now, in the hospital setting, there's lots of places where plants are prohibited due to infection concerns or equipment needs and such.
right.
So
With the waiting room.
yeah, what we're doing in those situations, we're looking at the nature imagery, biophilic nature imagery. So it's not quite the real thing, but the literature shows that it's almost as good as the real thing. So
Mm,
instead of having a blank wall, you have a beautiful forest picture. And I've just finished a study concerning the nature imagery in hospital rooms. And so in the rehabilitation rooms, which are very kind of stark, they're clean, they're neat, but stark. And we put nature imagery posters up and a bed curtain. And so we got significant results in terms of many aspects of patient satisfaction.
mm.
So when the real thing can't be used, nature imagery can often be helpful. I
Well, that makes
prefer the real thing, of course, but in certain situations, it just can't be applied.
right, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, think about the post recovery after surgeries and things like that. Those are highly stressful situations. And like you were saying, in the maternity ward, there's so many places in a
Yeah.
hospital. Well, even in a regular physician's office, I always enjoyed, as a student, when I was a medical student 100 years ago, you'd go to certain offices and they were like white walls, but those who had like even nature pictures or pictures of their interests and hobbies, those were so much more appealing and calming because you almost feel more human.
You're
Maybe that's it.
engaged. Yes, you're engaged in that, and you trust the doctor more because he's more human in that respect. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
I know our dentist, that would be a great place for nature imagery.
There's studies have been done with aquariums,
Really?
and
Oh,
they would put an aquarium in there and then ask people, I forgot what the questionnaire was, and then they take the aquarium out and they do the same thing, and they found the aquarium eased anxiety a lot, as well as a couple other things. So yeah,
wow.
and certainly in waiting areas, that's when you're nervous about what's going to happen, that stuff can easily put your mind, take the edge off. So yes,
Hmm.
certainly many applications in those areas, waiting as well as treatment. Procedure rooms, where
Oh my
somebody's
God.
going to get a needle or something that's like uncomfortable, to have a focus. There's been a number of studies on nature distraction in those situations. Bronchoscopy was one of them.
Mm.
People recovering from hemorrhoid surgery in a hospital room with nature imagery and plants. And there's been a number of studies exemplifying those ideas.
Absolutely. And it's curious. I know you had one of your articles was about um, horticulture therapy in cardiac patients or heart
Yes.
rate or something. Can you tell us
Yeah. Yeah.
what did you find there?
Well, we had the horticultural therapy program where the cardiac rehab patients would come down to the greenhouse. We would do an interpretive plant tour, emphasizing sensory interest and survival. So I'm hoping that people think, oh, the plants survive in this way. How am I going to survive? What can I do to survive this, heavy thing in my life? And so we would do that and check out the different plant groupings and explore and answer questions. And then we would go into the therapy room right next to the greenhouse, which used to be the orchid room, but we put a table in there and you could fit about 8 people around. And we would talk about what you can do when you go home to further your rehabilitation and using nature as a way to further that. Walking, right? Building aerobic capacity so that you have your walking in around your house, around your apartment building, around your neighborhood as you build up, going to the park to do your walk so that you can rest and like help your heart rate come down more quickly. Good diet, right? Healthy eating is a key feature with cardiovascular health. Managing stress, and that's another thing that the nature provides. So we would talk about those things, and then they would make a plant. They would propagate a plant to take home, and so and that would be the program. And so that group of folks were compared to another group of patients who just did a different patient education lecture, and the main outcome was blood pressure and heart rate and a PALMS test, which is profile of mood states. So the cardiac, the horticulture therapy group compared to the control group had less agitation on the PALM scale and a significant decrease as well in heart rate. So indicating a stress reducing response. So, that was a nice study. And the patients would come back to the unit and they'd be all mellow and kind of smiley. And the doctors said, hey, what's going on down there? We're going to take a better look at this. And we did. And that's what came out of it.
Because it's amazing because heart attack patients actually have higher risk of depression. So
Certainly.
what a great way to help get them started. And of course, I only eat plants because I'm plant based. And I will tell you, in the last 8 years since I've been vegan, enjoy cooking. I've always enjoyed cooking, but this is the colors and it's so much
Yeah.
fun, and the flavors it's a different experience than cooking just regular other food. And it's enjoyable, like a huge salad, it has all the colors and you're
Yeah.
looking at the greens and the reds and
Color's a
the
good thing,
textures.
right?
It is the phytonutrients that
Yeah.
we have that vision for a reason. And which brings me to a question I had thought of was, what about those who are visually impaired? How do you bring this to someone like that who can't maybe appreciate the colors and the textures from the visual component? How do you help those?
Well, we have touch and we have scent.
Mm.
So we orient somebody at the workspace and they'll be handed the plants, and we'll choose plants that are maybe a little more touchy-feely sensory oriented, maybe herbs with fragrance or other kinds of fragrant leaved plants. And so they tend to work well. And then we just orient using, sort of a clock system, and people who cannot see anything at all are able to plant like that, just like they would at home making a meal. You get used to your setup and everything's in the same place, and you know what's here and there, and you know how to put it together to complete what you're doing. So many people over the years have planted with visual difficulties.
Wow. So you said in a clock, so you have them say, okay, this is at 2 o'clock, this is at 4 o'clock, here's this and that, and then
Yeah,
that time.
exactly.
Oh, that's
Or I'm going to
fabulous.
hand you this now or whatever it is, so that they know that something's coming in their hand and they're ready for that. And yeah, it orients somebody and allows somebody to complete a task that otherwise, may be a bit difficult. And, you got to use all your senses. And if one of them's not there, that's okay. You work around it as best you can, and
Mhm.
that's life, right?
Absolutely. So what is your favorite plants to work with patients with? What have you found them be the most versatile and the most, I would say, probably hardy?
Yeah, well, that says it right there. Because the patients take home their plants, I tend to do a mix of hardy plants and then something exotic and interesting that, may be a little more challenging to grow. Maybe they may lose it after a while, but they've sort of like the coffee,
Mhm.
which is pretty interesting. And so, and you want to enable, part of my therapy is enabling people to be successful so they get the culture and advice on how to care for that plant as well after they go home, not just in the hospital.
That is really cool. So do you have any specific, like, let's say advice for the regular primary care doctor who's in a normal family practice and internal medicine, setting? I know they should be getting plants themselves, physicians, which is another project of mine, is wanting helping doctors get better. But what would you suggest as how could we maybe prescribe this to our patients? Like, how would you recommend us? What would we say, or what would we do?
Well, for one, the environment, your office will benefit from having some plants, makes it warmer, makes it cozier, reduces the stress and anxiety. And then in terms of prescribing nature activity and nature exposure. So what you can say is, how are you doing with your exercise? What would you think about taking a walk in the park? I'd like to write you a prescription. So 3 days a week, you take a half an hour walk in the park and you're going to get your exercise. You're going to get some stress reduction and anxiety reduction. And that alone can be helpful for many medical conditions and general wellness. The garden and nature contribute to general human wellness in many ways and can really set a good sort of foundation for the rest of health and building a healthy life.
That's awesome. I almost feel like you need a prescription pad and say, okay, I'm going to prescribe you an herb garden, and I'm going to prescribe
Yeah,
you.
I've read articles where physicians have done that. There's somebody in
Really?
California who actually writes a prescription that you need to spend 15 minutes in the garden 3 times a week so that if you tell somebody, maybe he's just, but if it's written down on a real script, then maybe it's followed better.
Yeah. No, I've actually made, no kidding, pinky promises with someone. This is a
Yes.
hilarious story. And I was like, I need you to start walking out, and just to get walking. It wasn't necessarily in nature, but it just happened to be. And you're in Colorado. I mean, you have mountains and everything.
There's lots of
There's lots of nature. It's you. And I was like, do you promise? She goes, well, I'll try. I was like, I try is not enough. I said, I need you to promise me. I was like, will you break a pinky promise? And we did. And it's funny. We did that, and within a year, she's lost like 60 or 70 pounds. She was walking 2 or 3 miles. But it starts with, I agree, someone showing an interest and encouraging someone to do that. But do you also feel like the sounds of nature are so important too? Because I know that's part of the part I enjoy, is getting away from the sound of civilization. Is, do you ever play special music while you're in your therapies, or is it just more just the sense and the smell and the touch?
Well, being away in whatever sense it takes, working in the city, you don't want the city sounds around. So, however you can mask them, either through bird sounds. We in the greenhouse we had many birds, and we played classical music.
Mm.
So nature sounds are, again, the literature shows that when the sound, the scent, and all of it together produces a greater effect. The more sensory involvement, the more positive distraction, the more feeling away, and again, the greater effect with that. So
Mm.
it's good to incorporate those things.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're teaching, like too much background sound can be interfering. So you have to, be careful about what you're doing and if the sound is going to interfere. But in a general sense, the more thorough and complete the natural environment is, the more thorough and complete the effect will be in terms of restoration and relaxation.
It makes sense because I know myself, I sleep better when it's raining.
Yes.
And I have a little app when I can't sleep, which is not too often. And it was called this, it's like a little sleep owl sleep pillow. And it has all these natural sounds like thunderstorms and
Yes.
ocean waves and birds chirping. Some of them are a little distracting. The jungle sounds made me a little nervous, but the,
Yeah.
the rest are okay. But what a great thing. And I'm assuming because people say they smell, like they'll put lavender by their bed and the scent helps them rest and sleep. And is there any particular things that you found that helps people sleep? Because I know the sleep is a big one for a lot of people.
Well, the lavender is a relaxing, a sleep promoting scent, an aromatherapy. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because in the experiment that I've done with the nature imagery, we started with a sound machine as well. The nature imagery, real plants, and a sound machine. I checked out scent. I was going to put scent in there as well, but there were issues with the machine as a fire hazard because it uses a plug-in, and they were really cautious, so that got taken out. But then the sound machine, with exactly what you say, they can pick a number of different sounds, but people took them home. That's how much they liked them. So that had to be eliminated from the experiment because I couldn't afford replacing them
Oh
as often as
no.
needed. So they, even I said, this stays here. This is for the next patient. But sure enough, they were gone,
Oh
So like you
wow.
say, and the patients felt the same. The sound was a broader sort of sensory immersion that was helpful for them in a hospital setting, made them feel at home or more comfortable.
You know what I've done before is those scented soaps that are made. My husband and I were in Washington State, and we were in Bellevue at the Bellevue Gardens,
Yeah.
there's Botanical Gardens,
Mhm.
and were selling these, and they were really strong. I said, "There's lavender, so we're gonna buy these bars of soap," and we opened them and put them by our bed, and you
Yeah.
could smell. I mean, and it stayed, and for a long, long time. And so that might be another option to bring in,
Good.
small soaps that smell like that. I don't know. We used to use where I worked before. We used plant-based nutrition, and we did therapy as well with patients. And we had a diffuser that would do different scents as well that have been shown to decrease stress and help.
Yes.
And I'm like, whatever we can do to put more power in our
Exactly.
cord.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
sometimes we do, crafts, and we'll do lotions where they, use essential oils to customize their own personal lotion. And,
yeah,
the lavender is certainly amongst the menu, so to speak. So,
absolutely.
but they get to pick what they like after sampling a bunch of different, scents. And so, yeah,
That's
it's
awesome.
a nice component. They like that. And it's
That
their
is,
own personal lotion.
it's a phenomenal thing. And I think it's just really cool to see us. One is I think a world that we're understanding that the environment is such an important thing that we need to be protecting and not taking for granted and just using for our own benefits without understanding there's repercussions. But just bringing it into patients who are sick, I think that's just such a really awesome element. I wish I'd have known about 20 years ago when I started medicine, but it's such a cool, it's just a really cool thing. So thank you. And do you have any last bit of advice? I know we're pushing our time limit here. As far as someone who's listening to this and going, "Wow, where do I even begin?" Should they go to their local greenhouse, or should they look you up somewhere, or read a book, an article?
Well, biophilia concept. If you Google that, you can learn a little bit about that. And then there's a book called The Biophilia Hypothesis, which gets into a little more detail. American Horticultural Therapy Association has some information on their website if you wanted to, explore a little further. But generally speaking, I would suggest spending time out in the yard, in a park, in a
Mm.
garden. Tend a few house plants. Experiment a little bit. You don't want to overburden yourself. But but try something, and you'll find that sometimes that's the doorway to, get a little more comfortable with it, and you can build on that if it's something that's of interest.
It's really
Nature,
fun. Nature
nature
is,
is very accessible in many ways, and it's, it's disappearing quickly, but it's still there, and we need to spend time with it.
yeah, well, we need to stop that, halt that disappearing, but bringing nature inside. And it's fun because I will share with you, I had a patient that was dealing with a lot of different things. And because of, what I read in Summer's brain book and your, especially your parts of it, I was like, okay, so I'm really going to try this. And she was really open to alternative type of solutions. And what we did is I said, I'm giving you a homework assignment. I want you to get a plant. This is all I told her. And I want you to take care of it. And because she was really struggling with motivation and moving things and doing and getting, and next thing I know, probably 3 months later, she has, because we would do video texting and follow up. And she showed me on her seal. She started with one, and then she had like 13 or 14 different plants, and they worked amazing. And when I did meet her in person, because we were just doing telemedicine at the time, she actually brought me a plant. And it's my favorite plant. It's the coolest little thing. And I was like, wow, it's so fun to see. And now she, part of a lot of our visits, we're just talking about her going to classes and learning different things and learning how to do bonsai. And I was like, this has turned into a
Wonderful.
wonderful thing. So I think, I'd encourage, I have a lot of doctors who listen to this, that I would encourage them to open their mind to considering something like the work that you're doing. And I'll put all these links too, and a link to your bio as well, obviously. And we so appreciate your time.
Nature is good medicine.
Nature is good medicine. And I think that's a great title for your podcast. Nature is good medicine. Absolutely. So is there, again, thank you again for your time, and we do appreciate you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're
Best wishes
welcome.
in your work.
Okay, one sec here.